Cool. Good day, everyone. Thank you for those of you who managed to show up today for this webinar. This webinar is part of a webinar series of the Network of Researchers in Sustainable Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's an initiative of Enhanceria, which is a project that supports the research and innovation dimensions of the Enhance Alliance, which is a kind of EU-funded alliance of European universities of technology. So today with us is Meike. Meike is a PhD candidate at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And in her PhD, she largely focuses on, the phenomenon of investment behavior of business angels in green startups and how their involvement evolves after the investments are made. So without overshadowing too much of what she will talk about, let me invite Meike to open this webinar herself. Meike, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Yashar. Yeah, I'm super excited to have this presentation today. As Yashar said, I'm a PhD student. I'm now starting my last year. And actually, the presentation that I'm going to hold for you today is really about the core of my PhD thesis. So I don't want to take away too much. But yeah, in the PhD, I'm focusing on business angels that invest in green startups and how they are involved after the investment. And then there are so many other projects going on in this realm of sustainable entrepreneurship and investors. So for example, we have another project on venture capital firms or incubators, but now in the PhD, and today I'm focusing on business angels. So I'm going to start my presentation and just share my screen so that you can all see it. Right. So the topic of today's presentation are green angels, but also other investors for green startups, because green angels cannot be seen only as the sole investors for green startups. But to give all of you a little bit of insights into what we're talking about when we talk about green startup. So the idea behind that is that new technologies, of course, are essential when we talk about the transition to a sustainable society and a society that is a future worth living in, basically, as we all know. And then within this context of sustainable entrepreneurship, the focus of this project lies on green startups. So there, the idea is that green startups can leverage both economic but also environmental benefits. So it's this hybrid idea behind that. And just like every other startup, green startups need external capital to develop and commercialize their innovations, their environmentally friendly innovations. However, green startups have some characteristics that make them a little bit more complex than the traditional startups, and this makes them less attractive to the conventional investors that we know of. And this kind of conflict is something that I'm investigating in my PhD. And just to get everyone on board, I brought this slide that shows you the different investor types in entrepreneurship. So I'm looking at business angels, and business angels come in quite early, somewhere around here. Business angels are defined as high net worth individuals who invest on their own or with others in unquoted companies in which they have no family connection. So often they also have an entrepreneurial background, and they have a lot of entrepreneurial experience and financial capital that they then give into the startup at a very early stage. There are other funding sources such as public grant, seed funding, or crowdfunding. And then the more mature the startup gets, the more it goes into the commercialization phase. Other actors come in, like, for example, venture capital firms or banks, for example. But venture capital firms are the largest source of capital in that context. And then just for the comparison, it's important to know that venture capital firms invest equity from outside. So they invest other people's money in a professionally managed way, of course. So business angels invest their own money, while venture capitalists invest their limited partners' money. So, and often there is this escalator kind of from using your own savings as an entrepreneur or family and friends money to public grants to business angels. Then you get venture capital financing, and then you have an IPO, for example. So you sell the company, or then it kind of goes like this. But this is just important to understand the context of financing when we talk about it like that. And as I said, green startups are not the ideal case for investors because of their complexity. However, there are a lot of different green venture capital funds and sources emerging. So it's a huge topic right now. And millions of euros are being pledged to get invested into green startups. So there is something going on, even though it's not the ideal match. But this mismatch, I want to talk about it a little bit more, because when we talk about venture capital investments, or also just the ideal angel investment in that sense, so has a short time horizon. So you have the promise of a fast return on investment. It has limited complexity, so just so that it has less insecurity also as an investment. Then there's high growth potential, so not just a return of the initial investment, but also a nice profit associated with it. And then the investment fund ideally is defined in the beginning, and you don't need to refinance it a lot. However, in green ventures, they have some characteristics that just make it not the ideal match. So you have information that is often different because of the longer development times, or it's often technology heavy. So those technologies are often more complex. They still are in development. They're novel. As I said in the beginning, we need these novel technologies to make the step into sustainable societies, and that is more complex, which makes it more capital intensive. So more expensive in the short term. And then it's also not always just aimed like traditional startups at scaling fast and returning the investment fast, but they have this hybrid mission of both scaling economically, but also in terms of environmental impact. And then another challenge is that the information that the green startups have often is imperfect. So it's hard to measure the impact or the potential impact of a startup in such an early stage. And then there is a lack of standard, a lack of transparency, a lack of comparability in that sense as well, simply because it's such a novel and emerging field. And then overall, the information is also just more difficult because, exactly as I just said, it's a emerging field that is novel, it's dynamic, there is a lot going on. And so there is a lack of an attractive track record to impress the investors and convince the investors and show to them that it is a good case. And so when we have conventional investors that invest into these green projects, there is the danger that information asymmetries can arise. And also there is the danger that these conventional investors can push the mission, and it can occur that there is a mission drift away from the long-term sustainable goals or hybrid goals towards short-term profit, right? And this conflict was super interesting to me when I started my PhD, and this is also where the first study came to be of, because the literature that is out there discusses this mismatch between venture capital and green ventures a lot, but still we have venture capital firms and business angels and other actors investing in green startups. And I wanted to dig deeper into this phenomenon. And then there is really very little on business angels investing in green startups. And I thought this is perfect to start digging a little bit and seeing what's going on. Because as I said before, venture capital firms invest other people's money and they have contracts and they're quite bound to these contracts in terms of what they can do actually. But business angels they're independent because they invest their own money. They're often mission driven and they're willing to invest in high risk projects. So they're super interesting canvas kind of to investigate green startup investors. And so in this study, we ask, how do business angels add sustainability value to green ventures? And then we go a bit deeper and look at how these value adding activities are kind of connected to the business angels' own sustainability characteristics, like their motivation to invest, their sustainability competence and background, and then their actual sustainability investor activity. And the results of this study can be found in Venture Capital, where it was published last year together with Øyvind Gjørgum and Roger Sørheim. But yeah, I'm going to present it in the following slides as well. What I also want to say is that business angels in general are super heterogeneous, so they're all quite different. And then with this study we say, and then in sustainable entrepreneurship, they're even more different. So there is a lot going on. But I'm happy to take the time to show you, to give you some insights into these special investors, and also to get you on board. What is really cool about business angels is that they add value beyond financial capital. So even though they are really interesting to startups because they have this money that they want to put into the company, they also often have their own business and entrepreneurial experience, which just helps them bring on human capital and social capital that is really central in giving the startups their unique advantage in that sense. So there is this figure, or this table by Politis from 2008, where you can see, okay, so there are 4 different roles of value-adding activities that business angels offer their startups traditionally, and that is the sounding board and as a strategic role, then the resource acquisition, supervision and monitoring, and mentoring the startups. And that's gonna matter when I talk about what green angels do. So methodology-wise, we conducted a comparative case study to study this phenomenon, so it was quite explorative. And for this, we interviewed 14 business angels from Germany and the Nordics. So it was semi-structured interviews that were quite open, and it was just really insightful conversations, usually around 60 minutes, that gave a lot of insightful information. And for these 14 business angels, the selection criteria were that they have to have had invested as a business angel, as exactly as the definition says, without being related to the founders. Then we were looking for lead investors who were actively involved in their investments. So you can also just, be a passive investor. So you provide financial capital and then not that much more, but we really wanted to talk to the investors who are hands-on involved in the startups. And then, of course, we were looking for investors who had at least one green startup in their portfolio, but ended up with investors who definitely had more than one that they're involved in. And then just to limit it geographically, we were looking for business angels in Germany and the Nordics to have, not just because I'm from a Norwegian university, so we didn't just want to have the Norwegian perspective, but also open up a bit more. And Germany and Sweden are also big angel markets in Europe that, on the other hand, aren't too different, and the understanding of sustainability and green startups is quite similar. So that was cool in that sense. And I also have to say that it can be pretty difficult to get in touch with these angels because, yeah, when you invest in startups, you get a lot of messages and people who are interested in talking to you to get support for their startup and other causes. And I was super lucky to get to talk to these 14 business angels. And they were super interesting people to talk to, but also the Enhance Alliance was actually a really nice partner in building my network towards getting these contacts. So I'm very thankful for the Enhance Alliance in that regard. But then we had some findings in the study, luckily. So this big table I will use to show you the initial findings. So it was really fun to see that when we talk about how are business angels adding sustainability value to their startups, our findings show that there are 2 different groups of business angels. We have the light green angels and then the green angels. And you can see nicely here that for the sustainability value adding activities, we used exactly these 4 value adding roles that Politis defined in 2008 to extend them with the concept of sustainability. So we're looking at sustainability strategy advice, sustainability monitoring, sustainability resource acquisition, and sustainability mentoring. And in that sense, these 2 groups differ. because the Light Green Angels, they do invest in green startups, but in these green startups, they offer not a lot, not a lot of sustainability value adding activities, while then the Green Angels are in this group because they offer at least 3 different types of sustainability value adding activities. So it's not just one activity, like for example, strategy advice, but usually they are active with a little bit more. And then what was really fun is that it's not just the roles that differ, but also the descriptive dimensions that are the second research question. So the motivation differs often between light green and green angels. The portfolio composition differs too. So light green angels often have a more mixed portfolio, while green angels often have a green only or impact only or sustainability focused portfolio, which also, as you can hear, maybe this also shows the challenges, which definitions to apply. Do you want to apply impact or sustainability entrepreneurship or whatever? But in this context, this is what we did. And then interestingly, also the sustainability competence, which we define as a sustainability background. So do they have their business or entrepreneurship experience from sustainability focused industries? It also plays a little bit of a role. So I think I have time to go a little bit into detail who Green Angels are and what they do. So who are Green Angels? If you look at why they are investing in green startups, the two groups differ quite a lot because the Light Green Angels often talk about that they want to be, they see that there is a shift, it's a trend, there's something going on in sustainability, entrepreneurship, so they want to be a part of it. This is what motivates them, it excites them, it's fun to be a part of this shift of talent and capital. Maybe there are some personal motives, for example. One just said they liked restaurants, so they're happy to support a sustainable startup that focuses on food. But also the topic of bad consciousness often came up, right? I wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror in 20 years and say, okay, I've done my part. I've contributed to financing sustainable innovations rather than non-sustainable innovations, right? So this played a huge role, while the angels that were then categorized as green angels talk a lot about this aim. They really want to affect societal transformation. They want to be a part and a hands-on part in shaping this transition. So there is a little bit of a difference. If we look at the portfolio composition, I just said so, right? The light green angels often have a mixed portfolio, while green angels have a specific focus. And then competence and background wise, light green angels often don't have the sustainability specific background, while green angels actually often, or more than at least the light green angels, have this sustainability affiliation. For example, that's what I said earlier, right? There isn't this huge track record in sustainable entrepreneurship, but some of the early green or sustainable entrepreneurs that then had an exit, they then go and then become green angels and continue to providing their insights to the next generation of sustainable entrepreneurs in that sense. And then we can go a little bit more into the actual roles and what that means. So if we look at sustainability strategy advice, right? A light green angel would focus on growing the business and maybe forward some industry trends in this, for example, in the energy industry. So there is a conversation going on about strategic opportunities within sustainable strategies in that sense, or maybe there isn't. So that's also an option. But then green angels, on the other hand, they often hold a dedicated sustainability focused board position. So it's their role in the board to make sure that sustainability is anchored in strategically, and then develop a clear sustainability strategy or a clear sustainability value proposition. So that the startup doesn't have sustainability as an add-on, but it's really anchored in the entire strategy and mission. And then if we talk about sustainability monitoring and supervision, like green angels often don't really have an approach to monitoring the sustainability and impact progress, where green angels usually, they either require clear indicators for sustainability, or they say it's a bit too early in the process to have indicators already. but they're aware that it's a topic, and then they talk about, or they start this conversation with the startup and request indicators that are quantifiable and kind of lay the groundwork for the later reporting. So they start with building this awareness early on. And then if we look at sustainability resource acquisition, like Green Angels either don't have this sustainability focus in the resource acquisition, or what they often do is advertising the startup, the green startup, in their own network. So LinkedIn activity, for example, introductions to other interesting people like clients, for example, or yeah, HR support. And then also what like Green Angels do a lot is connecting their startups with sustainability experts. So they know they're not in that sense an expert, but they have the network to help the portfolio startup find the people that can help them. And then on the other hand, Green Angels, they really provide this sustainability focused network. It's their strength that they've built this over some time. They prepare the startups for future sustainable investors or sustainability focused financing. It's really, that's the goal, to have a follow-on financing from someone who's also focusing on this hybrid mission. And then what they interestingly also do a lot is connecting their portfolio startups amongst each others to create synergies within the portfolio. And finally, sustainability mentoring. Like Green Angels don't really engage in it as far as our insights provide insights. But Green Angels, then they are really, it's an ongoing conversation where they challenge the entrepreneur's mindset and just have the sensibility that this is that being a sustainable entrepreneur is kind of this challenging process where you often have to balance profit or scaling the startup, but still keeping your environmental values and mission going. For startups, this means it does not, first of all, it does not mean that one is better than the other, but it does mean that startups are advised to carefully select their business angels according to what their specific needs are as a green venture at the time of seeking financing. So the advantages of a like green angel, for example, is that they are quite similar to conventional business angels, but they do recognize sustainability as an important aspect of the startup, and then focus on building the business. They have a strong conventional network. So that's the advantage kind of like green angels. However, slightly what startups also have to be aware of is that like green angels would then not really have a sustainability value added in the specific sense that I just presented, or at least not only a limited one. And then there's also the possibility that like green angels might look at green startups or look for green startups simply to make their portfolio appear a little bit more green or more sustainable than it maybe is. And then on the other side, green angels have the advantage. What they offer to the startups is that they have this sustainability competence, plus also the entrepreneurial background. So they have this hybrid mindset, the dual mindset. And then they offer sustainability value added across the different dimensions. However, we also see that they are less formally organized with other investors because it is such an emerging field, and the structures are just emerging as well. So it's less formally organized. And then, of course, if you have a business angel who really has their heart in sustainability, that might be that's a conversation you have to have if this is the possible hindrance of the fast scaling process. If you have these conversations like, should we go with a contractor that is cheaper or with the one that is more local, more sustainable, for example. For business angels, or for green angels, the study gives insights into how it really does matter how you're engaged in your startup and how you're involved. Because being a green angel, you can build bridges between traditional investors and sustainable entrepreneurs. So it's a really, at least that's what I think, it's a really important role that you can have in this emerging field. And by going beyond only investing in green startups and providing your financial capital, and instead actively contributing to the startup's sustainability performance, you can really play a big role in transitioning to a more sustainable society. And also for angels, it matters to understand that you can stand out from the crowd by offering sustainability value-adding activities. And that can give you yourself a competitive advantage, because then you are a really important resource for the startups, especially at this early stage. We also highlight the importance of quantifying the impact of green startups, because that's essential to really target green startups intentionally. Yeah, so finally, kind of the baseline is that individual actors can use their financial, human, and social capital to be change agents and enable sustainable entrepreneurship. So concluding, this means that business angels investing in green startups can be quite specific and different to what we have known about business angels' behavior. And we do introduce green angels as a term for business angels that not only invest in green ventures, but also add the certain sustainability value through their post-investment activities. And now it's going to be interesting to see, we have this green angel focus, but of course it's a little bit fuzzy lines between sustainable entrepreneurship, environmental startups, social startups, all of this, impact startups. But also interestingly, this could be a fun avenue to pursue in terms of other just knowledge intensive sectors. Like, for example, if you look at AI, like our business angels, they're also different in terms of what activities they offer to their startups. Yeah. And then outlook wise, because I'm a PhD student, so I think it's important to offer some perspectives what else can come. So I think there are so many different interesting and exciting opportunities for future research. So for example, the role of business angel networks, of course, in the matching of green startups and business angels, but also in the enablement of these activities of building this ecosystem. Also the collaboration among green and less green actors is super interesting. Then my second PhD paper was about angel learning when investing in green startups. So that's also a huge topic. And then, you can look at green venture capital firms and their activities. You can look at more investor learning, mission drift, the startups demand side for these activities. So to me, there is a lot of opportunities. And I'm super keen to look at those in my PhD and after. So I say thank you, and please reach out if you have an interesting case or if you want to talk to me about this. I'm open for collaborations all the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Meike. This was great. There is one question from an anonymous participant, which is, which standards or framework green angels use to quantify impact created by their portfolio? Does it vary among green angels?
Yeah. So this is kind of the sustainability monitoring side, I would say, if the question is aimed at post-investment activity. But generally, I can already say that the angels that I've talked to for the study and also since then are not super focused on quantification and indicators, simply because they come in at a very early stage where the startups are still in the process of building their business idea often. So quantitative indicators don't play a big role in the investment decision making. And then slowly after that, business angels start to dabble a little bit with indicators. Like, for example, the SDGs are something that are quite applicable for angels in that context. So that is often, especially for angels that don't have the sustainability background, maybe. So often they start with looking at SDGs and starting to have this conversation with their startups. But then often, they would use less complex frameworks and start looking at, for example, the life cycle assessment. So what are the potential CO2 emissions that are reduced with this idea? So something quite simple, that is not too overcomplicated for the angels, but also for the startups, because they don't want to make the startups focus too much on quantification, and they want to focus on developing the idea and the business case, from what I see in the study at least.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered the question of the participant, that we don't know who that person is. So if you're wondering or if you have a follow-up question, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, I just wanted to ask like two questions that are related. One is in the larger scheme of things when it comes to funding green startups. How would you compare the role of business angels in relation to venture capitals when they want to invest in, sustainability related ideas or startups as opposed to a normal type? And the kind of the connecting tissue with that would be like, are you aware of, or do you know something about the collaboration between the VCs and business angels in your particular context, and whether the dynamics of these collaborations would differ based on, the domain or the premise of the idea, which is not about really, multiplying the investment per se only, but also catering to other aspects?
That's a good question. It's also an important question. Unfortunately, I don't have any numbers or investment volumes, like how much do green angels invest compared to green venture capital. But the ticket size, so if we start there, the ticket sizes that green angels invest are quite similar to traditional angels in that sense, because they are just like traditional angels. They are investors that want to make a return. So one shouldn't make the mistake of assuming they provide less money, or they are willing to take more of a risk in that sense. They are investors just like everybody else. And then comparing green angels and green venture capital is a little bit difficult, because they are not competitors in that sense for startups, but it's an escalator, right? So what I can see from the interviews I've had is that a lot of business angels like their startups to then mature into venture capital companies, because it's the kind of the natural next step for many. So that's also a very important role then that these angels have. They have their VC contacts and their network, and they can make these introductions. And then exactly as you asked, sometimes there are these differences, because some business angels can be a little bit wary of venture capital firms, and maybe it wouldn't be their preferred next financing step for their startup to go into venture capital, because then in a VC, if you're funded by a VC firm, you just have this quite strict timeline that I've told you before, usually 7 years, something between 5 and 10, where you're supposed to scale fast so that the VC firm can make their return on investment. So there are differences in how business angels in the sustainable entrepreneurship sphere see venture capital firms, for sure, because of this because of this less patient model. So a lot of business angels see themselves as patient investors. They're happy to invest now and not see a return for quite some years, as long as the startup continues to grow and achieve their mission, while venture capital firms have this short timeline. So that's maybe something.
Thank you. That was great. Anmar, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon it kind of, but you in your conclusion, in your end, you put between the brackets really green. So the usual question is how do we know something is really green, and all the discussion about greenwashing, and what is the kind of the most straightforward way to figure out whether this entrepreneur or this venture is really green? What is your reflections on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, it comes up a lot, and it also comes up a lot from the investor side. How do we know what is green? How do we identify a startup that has this potential to transform, but that also isn't too extremely risky and too early stage? How can we identify it? And that's a huge topic for investors. So that is something where investors often call for more public support, for example, government support in terms of chipping in on the investments or tax benefits, for example, to then reduce the risk of them not really knowing what to invest in. And if you want to go into something that is really, really green, that often goes into deep technology innovations. But there's also other startups that are really green, but yeah, it's a little bit outside of what I'm doing, of course, what is really green, but it's something that yeah, matters a lot to me. So I'm really happy to see that there is so much development going on right now in terms of impact measurement for startups. So this is like the first, or this is an important step of knowing, okay, so what is really green by developing these frameworks. But what investors do right now, the ones that I've talked to, they often, it's a little bit maybe this theory of change framework, but they don't really apply the framework, but the kind of the way of thinking. So does the solution make sense to me? And then a little bit of scenario thinking. What are the changes that are affected by this solution, positive and negatively? And then think about it like that. So I don't know if that answers the question perfectly well, but this is kind of the direction, the topics we're talking about there.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that we noticed when exploring the topic of sustainable entrepreneurship, or like even the attempts to measure the impact, there is like a high reliance on the SDGs. Of course, they have the advantage of, it's something that kind of known by most, it is agreed upon by the countries, but I mean, the thing is, like, the SDGs are not exactly like, a measurement tool. It's not, and at the end of the day, they are goals, and they are goals for countries. And like, from speaking to these investors, to what extent they are using the SDGs in their assessment or their measurement or evaluation or whatever you want to call it.
I think I agree on the SDGs as being country level goals and definitely not individual investor level goals. But the nice benefit of the SDGs, also outside of angel investments, is that they really illustrate different target areas where action is needed. And this is where the angel investors that I've talked to apply the SDGs as like a first step into entering this new realm, sometimes new realm for them. And then looking at, okay, what kind of SDGs is it? And then it's not just the SDGs, because sometimes it's quite obvious, right? If you have an energy startup, of course, it's going to be SDG 7, but then you can go a little bit deeper into the sub targets. But I also agree that the SDGs they don't really match what investors should be looking at or how they should measure startups impact. So there is a big demand on the investor side to have more applicable and easy KPIs. So it's a lot about easy, because usually angel investors cannot make their own LCA when they assess a startup, right? So they are really interested in more applicable and easy tools.
Yeah. Thank you. We also have a question from one of the attendees, Rosalia. You're welcome to turn on your mic and cam. Oh, you're doing that as well. So feel free to to ask it directly.
Hi, Meike. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very interesting. My question is, the difference between how we determine what is a green business angel and how they determine themselves. So I was wondering whether in the cases that you investigated, did they identify as green investors? Or did you determine them by their portfolio? And whether there is a difference in this between the what you call light green and green angels?
That's a really good question, because when I started the project, maybe I thought it's going to be nice. I'm going to approach them and say, hey, I see you're a green angel based on your portfolio. Can we talk? And then in a few interviews, people would say, I don't identify maybe as a green investor, but I identify as an impact investor. Or they sometimes, in very few moments, people also didn't really identify as angels, but as investors. But that's with a lot of, often it's like that. Some concepts are coined in some ways, and then people just don't identify in that sense. But because, we applied this definition and looked at the angel definition in that sense, and then we said, okay, so you have a green startup in your portfolio, so you do fulfill this like green check mark in that sense, because there is no official definition of what is a green investor, what is a green angel. What was the second part of your question?
No, I just had an assumption, which might be wrong, that maybe the business angels that were in your green group would identify themselves as green, and maybe
Yeah.
light green would identify as whatever, investors that happen to have green startups in their portfolio, but it's just an assumption.
Yeah, no, I also had some follow-up interviews afterwards for another study. And then sometimes they were quite curious to see, okay, where am I in the table, right? Am I this case? Am I this case? But often they had a pretty good gauge of their activities and what they're offering actually, or maybe they're sometimes a little bit too humble and thought they're like green, even though they're actually already on the green side with what they're doing. So it's super individual, actually. Thanks.
I think we have around 2 minutes left, and let's see if there is any other question. If not, I think we can close this webinar. This was really great, Meike. I really think the presentation was great and the topic was great, and you were very clear. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your learning from that paper. And of course, congratulations on the publication.
Thanks.
So I think if there is nothing else, and Anmar, you can help me with that, we can thank everyone for participating in the webinar, and hope everyone a great day.
Thank you very much, Meike. That was very insightful, very interesting, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we're looking forward to the next webinar already.
Yes, thank you so much.
Meike. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.